Hello there, folks. Welcome to Israel Explained Why Rafah No Longer Matters edition. So, as we all know, the issue of whether Israel is going to invade Rafah or not has become the center of political push and pull over Ramadan, with the United States at some point saying they placed a red line on it, Israel insisting they'll go in, Netanyahu keeping saying that he has a date, Gallant saying there is no date and all that stuff. And just last night, there was a cabinet meeting in which the invasion of Rafah took a very important part. So, according to leaked minutes from that meeting, the chief of staff, Herzi Halevi, said, quote, "We finished the maneuver. Our operations have finished fruition. We want to refresh our forces and prepare for Rafah. All our forces are exactly as we presented them in the cabinet." Um, Smotrich says, "Why do we need to wait? We should already be in Rafah." Netanyahu says, "Why didn't you suggest at first to go into both the north and south of the strip?" Halevi says regarding Rafah, "I suggest we don't discuss a date as the enemy understands when and where it is happening." And then Eisenkot tried to blame Netanyahu for the delay in Rafah, saying, "There's a cabinet member here who said that Gantz and myself are prevented an operation in Rafah." That is a complete lie. Someone else in this room is preventing it. There's a lot of he said, she said, and attempts to blame other people for there being no operation in Rafah because it's become such a symbol of the operation. And why it's become such a symbol? Because for a long time, as the IDF was closing in on Hamas, destroying battalion after battalion, that was the last safe haven, or the last major safe haven. There were other battalions that still survived in central Gaza for reasons I've never completely understood. Um, so going in there would be the end of the war, or at least be crucial in undermining Hamas's ability to control Gaza. But since the IDF has withdrawn from Khan Younis 4 days ago, that's increasingly not true. So, um, my sources are telling me Israeli media is saying Hamas has already reestablished itself in Khan Younis. It hasn't gone in armed because they don't want to be killed by the IDF, but it's gone in with clubs. It's sent in police. It's sent in civil servants, and it's even sent in members of the Hamas military wing. Um, so far, slowly undercover in order to re-establish themselves. They're using violence against locals with clubs in order to take it over. Um, they've also been attacking Fatah people or people from clans who have tried to get some control in Khan Younis, taking advantage of the fact that Hamas wasn't there. They've managed to fix the problem of inflation and the lack of food and supplies in the city to a great extent by removing taxes on food and bringing in aid. Um, the IDF is aware of all this and is watching Hamas retake Khan Younis, but it can't go around killing every single civil servant and teacher and policeman that come into that come into Khan Younis. That's not any way to operate. If they wanted to keep Hamas out of Khan Younis, they should have remained there. So it's already under Hamas control, and you have to imagine that within a few weeks it will include armed men in Khan Younis. Hostages will be moved to Khan Younis and the area around it. All of these sorts and entire battalions might end up relocating out of Rafah. So what's going to happen is that Hamas is going to rebuild its control south of the divider, where the only IDF troops that are currently sitting are right now, the Nachal troops. They're also going to try to rebuild north of the border, and it's unclear what the IDF is going to do about that. There are still tunnels connecting the north and the south. If a hostage deal is arrived at, that will mean civilians will be able to go from the south to the north. It looks like the IDF's grip is slipping in the north as well, has been for a while, and now that's happening in the south too. Now, once it's back in Khan Younis and other cities in the south and possibly the north, Rafah loses its focal point. It's just another city. Now, granted, it's on the border with Egypt, which makes it important in terms of smuggling, tunnels, and all that sorts of stuff. But if Israel wants to stop that, what it needs to do is not so much take Rafah as much as take the Philadelphia corridor, which is the border between Egypt and Israel. Doing that would necessitate the deployment of some troops into Rafah in the area adjacent to the fence, the Philadelphia fence, but not the entire city. That's a different operation, and it's much more viable from an international point of view in terms of American pressure. So, long story short, Rafah stops being the focal point as soon as Khan Younis goes back into Hamas hands, which is happening right now. And then there's another development that makes Rafah less important: the IDF doctrine. When this war started, I thought the IDF might be able to win this war by occupying all of Gaza and installing a new government. The IDF's doctrine and the government's orders have shown absolutely no interest in that whatsoever. Um, the IDF does not want to hold cities where Palestinian civilians are. They don't want to be in charge of day to day operations. When they're not in charge of day to day operations, there's either complete chaos or Hamas goes in. So, my concern is, I think what will likely happen, if the IDF goes into Rafah, after all of this contention between Israel and the United States, it will go in, it'll kill a bunch of people, it'll blow stuff up, and then it will withdraw. Then Hamas will regroup there. So it wouldn't be a decisive blow, it would just be another battle. And that battle appears to be part of what the IDF is now thinking will be a war that will take several years. And the truth is, Israel doesn't have the credit from the international community and from the United States to continue doing this for several years. And I'm not sure that continually raiding cities for several years would ever deliver the results that Israel wants. But that's a different discussion. Whether this is a good strategy or a bad strategy is a different discussion. What it does for sure is take the emphasis of Rafah. That is no longer important. There is no longer any major reason to defy the international community and go in there, since there really isn't any way that that will lead to the defeat of Hamas, which is the reason I thought Rafah was very important to begin with. So, continuing this war, going into Rafah and harming the Israeli reputation abroad more than it has, leading to possibly sanctions and the deterioration in relations with the United States, is simply not worth the benefit of going into Rafah. So, under the current conditions, I don't think it's important to go in there, and I don't think it's worth the price. So keep that in mind when people are talking about Rafah and blaming for Rafah. If Israel's just going to go in there and blow it up and leave, I'm not sure it's worth all the effort. Anyway, I have a bunch of questions from you, even though the video is very recent. You guys immediately left questions, and I thank you all for that. So let's get to answering them. Sunny LaBouffe says, regarding the day after plan, if by some miracle there's a change in government, Bibi gets a lobotomy before the war ends, and Israel shows renewed interest. Do you think such an arrangement is still salvageable? Or should we just forget it and reconcile ourselves to a Gaza in which Hamas continues to rule in some capacity? That's a great question. I think it's salvageable. Um, Possibly not with Netanyahu, like you said, not only because he would be against it, because I don't think anyone really wants to work with him all that much in the Arab world and even the United States. But the offer from Blinken to have a day after plan, which will link to a Saudi peace deal, is still something that the US is offering. And I think with a government that shows that it's willing to mend fences, the UAE, Egypt, and Saudi Arabia will be willing to come along because it's good for their interests to block Iran's ability to control Gaza. So I think it is doable. We don't have to reconcile ourselves. We do have to get rid of Netanyahu ASAP because he's blocking any possibility of winning this war, and that's becoming increasingly apparent. Cratchit Guyman says, we know that a few hostages were released earlier, and Israel had been previously told that they were dead by Hamas. Is that why Hamas is saying that there are more hostages dead than Israel thought? Is this a trick again? Great question. The answer to that is we really don't know. Hamas are sadists. They love making the Israeli families feel very concerned. They want to put pressure on families and on Israel that hostages are dying all the time. They want to delay the negotiations by days by saying, we don't have the hostages you want. Can we do these other hostages instead? All the back and forth takes a few days, and that helps them with wearing out Israel's ability, as far as international opinion is, to continue waging this war. So Hamas has a ton of reasons to lie. They're psychopathic liars. So I don't know if they're lying, and I don't know why they're lying exactly if they are. My guess is they are lying somewhat, and I think they could probably put together 40 humanitarian hostages if they really wanted to. But that's just a guess. I don't know. Israel knows for a fact, Israel intelligence knows for a fact that a lot of the hostages are alive. There's rumors that they're all dead. They're not. But the exact numbers, they estimate that it's around 40. I think Hamas is lying. Vanilova asks, how does foreign pressure really work? I live in Seattle, close to the area where Chaz was, super lefty, and a lot of my old school friends post very left too. I've seen a real downturn in posting, street activity, etc. over the past few months, but at the same time that the streets are moving on, international pressure is mounting. So, yeah, I think you bring up something very interesting. We tend to think of pressure, we talk on Twitter or Americans as what people are doing on the streets and the demonstrations. And as you mentioned, there has been a bit of a moving on with that. People are doing that less. What we forget is there's also the international community. So America's allies coming to it and demanding that it do something. Whether we're talking about its European allies, whether we're talking about its Arab and Muslim allies, coming to the United States and saying that this is destabilizing to them, and it's harming the US's relations with other countries. And that's very often how pressure on Israel starts. When the US feels like its standing in the world is slipping by being the only country in the world supporting Israel. That happened in 73, that happened in 82, and it's happening now. And yeah, the demonstrations in the street are part of it. Electoral interests in Michigan are part of it, but the international community is possibly the bigger part of it. So that's what's happening now, and it has very little to do with demonstrations in the streets. The governments are what matters. DIH 466 says, I am persuaded regarding your assessment of Bibi as risk averse, and this has been a debacle for the implementation of any strategy. But how did he sign off on the assassination of the Iranian generals without giving an advance heads up to the US consistent with this? Even though the Iranians don't respect embassies, it was still a pretty bold move. Okay, great question. So, can only guess, but um, I think that Netanyahu really wants to show that he's a tough guy who's fighting terrorism on any way that he can to make up for the fact that Gaza is turning into an absolute catastrophe. So this is a way for him to score points with the Israeli public, look tough, without doing what needs to be done in Gaza, which he just doesn't seem able to do. So I think that's part of it. These Israelis did warn the US, but they didn't plan it with the US. So it looks like they tipped off the US not long before it happened. And yeah, I mean, there's risk there, but not the kind of risk that Netanyahu is worried about. What he's really worried about is his coalition falling. This does not do that. This might help his coalition because there's an external attack, might bind people together. So that's my sense of why he did it. Also, probably a lot of pressure from the army and the intelligence because you don't often have targets like that aligning for you in the same place at the same time. Aliyah Aloha asked, with the assassination of Pascal Slaman, curious how that impacts Lebanon. I recall when I asked you about alcohol from Lebanon, you mentioned it was from the Christian community and indicated that keeping them happy is important, ironically, even to Hezbollah. Now that Slayman has been assassinated, curious about your analysis for Lebanon. How will that affect Israel? Probably very little. I think the balance of power in Lebanon remains the same. Hezbollah is the strongest party in the country, but it doesn't have complete domination of the country. So it needs to take the other constituencies into account. The fact that the Lebanese Christians feel more vulnerable right now might actually make them stand up more in order to restrain Hezbollah. But I don't think Hezbollah needs to be restrained all that much. Don't think they want to have a war now. It looks to me like as soon as things calm down in Gaza, that they will calm down. It looks to me like they don't particularly want to be involved in an escalation in order to get revenge for Iran. So my guess is this will affect very little. Of course, I'm no expert on internal Lebanese politics. Cool Snow 7 says, my guess is what will happen now is Israel will continue degrading Hamas, um, but will not go into Rafah for at least several months. I put the minimum at 7 for the elections. Okay, that's a long time. We will not get a single hostage back alive without physically rescuing them, but Hamas will slowly but surely lose control of the strip. What do you think of my scenario? Finally, assuming no hostage deal, it still does seem to me like Hamas cannot easily survive without one. Even absent military pressure, Israel can continue to refuse to relinquish control of the North Strip and continue to refuse to allow Gaza to be rebuilt. I think Harnia has recognized this for a long time and therefore has been seeking to integrate into the PA as part of a technocratic government. If this war becomes frozen, wouldn't it constitute de facto Israeli victory with respect to the aim of dismantling the Hamas military threat? Um, it would not be a complete defeat if we manage to permanently degrade Hamas, but I just don't think that that's viable. I don't think that Israel can continue to operate in Gaza in a rolling way forever. I think that it will be stopped. One of the ways it will be stopped, obviously, is through a hostage deal. The international community, I think, won't let this go on forever. And I think what we're going to ultimately end up with is Hamas in charge of Gaza, all of Gaza destroyed, and a very, very angry population looking to take revenge on Israel, with probably a whole bunch of terrorists that Israel releases in a hostage deal. Like the worst of all possible worlds is where I'm seeing this going right now. I really hope I'm wrong. Finally, another really good question I don't know how to answer from FRDZ4KB. Can you explain how the IDF, reportedly one of the finest armies in the world, turned into such a shit show? Killing 3 sons of Hania during hostage negotiations without running it up either chain of command in the IDF or to the political leaders? What the fuck is wrong? There's no discipline as we see with the videos. Even after they killed 3 of their own hostages. What is going on? So, an angry message full of angry but very legitimate questions. And I think what we have to come to the conclusion here is that the IDF, in this very savage war, has lost a lot of its vaunted discipline. It hasn't lost its ability to defeat enemies. It's gone into cities and destroyed Hamas, sometimes with low civilian casualties, despite what Hamas says, very effectively and very quickly without losing anywhere near as many soldiers as expected. So I can't say the IDF has degraded as a fighting force. In some ways, it might have even improved on the tactical level. But this blunt edge that the IDF has, this turning into a killing machine on a level that perhaps it's never been before, comes with a lack of discipline. The soldiers are angry. The soldiers are not being reined in by their commanders, and they're doing all kinds of things that they shouldn't be doing, including the things that you mentioned. Some of this appears to be a question of faulty chain of command issues, but some of this looks like trigger happiness to me. And with Israel's problems with the international community, that's something that really needs to be addressed. Okay. Um, Thank you for joining me. Um, Consider supporting me on Patreon if you like what I'm doing here. Like I've already told you, I have a new episode of the podcast out on the 12 tribes of Israel. So listen to that, and I will see you very soon. Thank you.